You're listening to the Ryangle Podcast, starring Ryan Hoger and Ryan Eastwood, and sometimes other people named Ryan. And now, here are some Ryans.
That's what's blowing the palm tree around.
I also am a fan.
I can feel a breeze on my face. I've instructed Allison to come and flick water and sand onto me at intervals. So that would be great. And joining us not on the beach, but apparently at a trendy IKEA'd out studio apartment in Saigon is
Delightful city.
Our lovely, wonderful friend, Rhonda. Hi, Rhonda.
Hi, Ryan and Ryan.
Hello, Rhonda. Oh my goodness! There's some sort of my God, there's something on my screen.
Some sort of horrible sea monster seems to have been attacking. Oh no, she did it. She heard me and she's doing it. There's real water coming at me.
Welcome to the show, Rhonda.
For those who couldn't see, my wife heard my snarky comment and decided to throw water on me. So be careful what you say during the podcast. I'm flustered by that. Now I'm unflustered. So I'm thinking most of the people listening to this will know Rhonda, but for those who don't, she's our good friend going way back, and what we wanted to talk to her about was she's been an English teacher of grades K through 12, is now a 4th to 5th grade special ed teacher, and maybe most relevant to this discussion, taught through the pandemic. And so she wanted to come on and share her thoughts about challenges for teachers and students. Something that's super interesting to me, especially probably interesting to people who do have children mostly, but since I don't have children, I don't interact with this world like at all. But I care that the people around me and the people who will be doing the jobs that keep me alive when I'm old are educated, and keeping our society together. So yeah. And so you're off for summer right now. Are you doing?
I am. Chose not to do summer school this year.
Okay, good for you.
So I'm on vacation-ish. Although I did accept a job to do catering over the summer, because one thing we'll probably talk about is I need extra money.
Yeah, I was gonna say my immediate first question there is: does your side catering job pay wildly better than your actual professional?
No, but it is a really nice supplemental income to have that is desperately needed. So,
yeah,
yes,
yeah. So we know that you're not flush with cash. You are performing a very important service. So in your just so we know, in your special ed stuff right now, is that all remote, or are you in person, or tell us a little bit about what you're doing right now?
So I was teaching 9th through 12th grade special ed here in the Sacramento area, and then taught through the pandemic there, and was doing virtual and in person at the same time, which was a nightmare. But
so
I found
sorry, can I define that? Like at the same time, like literally you have laptops in the classroom, or like some hours and then some hours live and some hours virtual?
No, I had some students in the classroom and some at home, and there's a camera on me, and I'm teaching both of them at the same time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, all right. That sounds awful. All right, continue.
And is that something that was done pre-pandemic, or is this all everything remotes?
No, it was a giant. It was a giant social experiment that failed miserably. Yeah. Luckily, it didn't last for very long. But after that, I wanted to find a new job, and I ended up finding a local charter school that's 100% virtual. And until the pandemic blew over, I was like, this is great. I don't want to have to choose between, I don't want to do this anymore. So just until this is done, I'm going to go fully virtual. Turns out I love the new school that I'm working at. It's an amazing, amazing school. It's a total godsend for me. Great administration, pay is better, benefits are better. So it's tricky doing virtual, but to answer your question, right now I'm 100% virtual. But my students are homeschooled, so it's a little bit different structure than if I was at a traditional, what we would call brick and mortar school.
Okay, so then why don't we get into to kick it off, the pandemic specifically, and what went on with that. So what were you doing when pandemic strikes for work? And then why don't you take us through what that immediate scramble to figure out what the hell was going on was like, and then how that's transitioned into now.
Oh, wow. So there were so many things that were affected by the pandemic. Well, at first we thought, okay, it's just 2 weeks off of work. That's what we were told at a giant staff meeting. And like, we had no warning whatsoever. We came to school on Thursday thinking that everything's fine. Friday, they send kids home early, take us all to the library and say, hey, you're not coming back. And and they said, we're going to come back in 2 weeks. So we're thinking like, all right, 2-week vacation, and we're like, are we teaching during that 2 weeks? They're like, nope, you just are taking 2 weeks. And then that turned into 3 and then 4. And then eventually they're like, we can't just not teach kids anymore. Like, we have to do something about this.
And you're at a public school?
Public school, public high school here in the outskirts of Sacramento. And like, okay. And so the whole state and the whole country is like, okay, well, if we can't have them in class, then what are we going to do? And so we had to have them on Zoom. And we use Microsoft Teams, but basically Zoom. Yeah. We're going to meet virtually. And I was teaching special ed, high school special ed. And so I taught English and math and study skills. And a lot of kids you imagine teenagers are just not showing up. Their parents, some of them are working from home. They're not checking to see if their kid's logging onto Zoom 4 times a day, 5 days a week. So most of the time, kids just didn't show up. I might have 1-2 students, some classes actually log on, and there was like nothing you could do about it.
Yeah, what are you gonna do?
Yeah.
No, I'd never really considered that before, because it's so easy from the outside to just be kind of, that obviously the pandemic hit and affected everybody. But then at this point, virtual meetings and virtual schooling has just been so accepted that it feels as if it was like something that was planned and set up. And it's, man, I haven't even considered that no, it was like on Thursday we were in school, and then by the next Tuesday, everybody's on Zoom, and then Zoom almost crashed.
Right. And even though we were using Teams, like, parents didn't know how to use Teams.
No. Like, I mean, nobody says.
And especially, I can't even imagine, like, at least I was teaching high schoolers. They're pretty tech savvy. What were parents with elementary school kids doing? Like, elementary school kids don't know how to do stuff on the computer yet. They can't type, So, I mean, it was pretty chaotic, to say the least. Eventually we got into a rhythm, but it took probably a good 6 months for everybody to adapt to this. But the bigger thing, there was a lot of other effects to this, obviously, because some parents were losing their jobs. They didn't have work. So even over the summer, I had parents calling me, asking me where they could get food, saying that they were going to be homeless. They needed homeless services, so the district had to help people find housing and get food for their kids. There was a lot that schools, and just in general, there's a lot that schools do besides just educate. So we kind of became a hub for all other social issues that happened due to the pandemic as well.
It's a bit like go ahead.
I wouldn't have considered that, but there's so few public gathering places that aren't intended to take money there's definitely a whole tangent we could go into just that in general, how that really it's just libraries and schools, and both are being attacked financially at all times like they have
Yes.
been my whole life. I remember when I was in high school, I was aware that teachers were being underpaid and that schools kept getting their funding slashed. And that's just continued, as far as I'm aware, for the last 20 years.
Yes.
It's
And as other social services get pulled back, then that makes sense that the school, like who else you're going to go to, like social services and food stamps and whatnot, like you can get it, but it's going to take weeks to be able to even talk to anybody. Your kid's teacher is right there, and they're a public employee, and maybe they can do something.
Yeah, exactly. And some parents are like they don't have their papers, like legal papers to be here, so they're scared to go to sign up for government help and things. So yeah, it was an interesting time.
To me, it's analogous. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
It's analogous to the discussion that happened around police, and not only defund the police, but like redefine what the police do and redirect some of that funding elsewhere, because it came out that, there's this big discussion around mental health and the fact that police were having to show up to situations that really should be taken care of by a social worker. And so then we have these huge gaps in our social services, and these people and these needs don't go away. And so they just end up getting, piled and piled on. And so basically you've got like police force and schools, non-force help, and like those two things. It sounds like you're getting piled on, just like the police say that they are.
We were for everything. And beyond that, the state of California had a lot of extra requirements to ensure that some kind of way to ensure that kids were showing up and actually receiving an education. But really that resulted in hours and hours of extra work every week for teachers. Just attendance alone every week could take me up to like 3 hours to complete, because of how we had to document attendance during that time. It was really crazy.
What was so tedious about it? Just you had to write like normally, I guess you have a sheet, you take attendance and you just check, Jimmy's not here, but there you've got to say each kid's like log in and log off time or something like that. Is that was so tedious?
No, well, I can't even remember. It was been a few years now.
Okay.
But no, it was so much more than that. We had to say for each child, were they present? Was it synchronous time or asynchronous time? Were they present or not present? But if they submitted an assignment, so we had to post an assignment every single day. And if they did the assignment, even if they were absent, if they submitted the assignment by midnight of that day, you had to go back in and mark them as present. So imagine I'm doing attendance at midnight I'm checking to see if any kids turned in any work by midnight so that I can mark them present for that day.
Why is the due date at freaking midnight? So you have to be up at midnight?
I mean, most teachers weren't because we're
wow.
Like, our hours are 8 to 4. Okay.
Yeah, no, that sounds like one of the many excellent examples of reasonably good intentions where the state wants to ensure that as everything's in chaos, that if these kids are doing assignments and keeping up but aren't able to access Zoom for some reason,
right, exactly.
Then they can still get credit, but then the government, the over regulation of it without actually being in there turns into maybe more of a nightmare than if everybody just had to figure it out for themselves.
And they put so much fear. It's like, okay, we're going to be audited. Our attendance is going to be audited. So we have to have all this data. And the state didn't tell us, okay, this is how you're going to do attendance. They just said, you're going to be audited for attendance. And this is the information we need. So every school
and then you had to come up with your
own solutions. Had to come up with a way to do this. And it was a total nightmare. It was
Yeah. So
awful.
like a requirement without a process or direction.
Yes.
And yeah, that's the,
And no time to implement it.
yeah, geez.
Yes, pretty much. They had days to figure something out. Yeah. And this has kind of been going on ever since the pandemic. So even just this last school year, in special education, we had to, we were being audited for students who during the pandemic maybe lost some services. So they didn't get to attend some services during that time because they weren't being offered during that time. So
You
we
mean
had
special
to
ed
evaluate
services?
special ed services
Okay.
like speech therapy or occupational therapy, things like that. So this is 3 years later now, had to assess if those students had any learning loss during that time that needed to be compensated for. And we're going to be audited for that. So we have that. So we're still doing some of these things to try to mitigate what actually was a really big challenge for kids. You know, there's still a little bit, I don't think they're as behind, most students aren't as behind as people would think. You know, there's a lot of talk about learning loss and things like that. But there were some effects from that. So we're trying to figure that out. How to,
Yeah, that was actually the immediate question that I thought of there is like, yeah, you know, I've heard enough from just keeping my eyes to the or my ears to the classroom that it seems like the majority like kids are behind where I feel like they should be. And I'm wondering whether you think that's true, and if it is, how much of it was the pandemic impact and how much of it has just been the education being steadily scraped away at for the last our entire lives.
yeah, I mean, I only have my immediate experience.
Of course.
And with my son, so my son is 14, he's about to be in ninth grade. He was in fifth grade. He was at the end of his fifth grade year when we went out of school. So, and for the next like year, he was doing virtual before he got back into a classroom. He was out for like a year. I don't feel like he was behind, but also he was old enough at that point. His reading and math skills were already really, really great. So I didn't really worry about him being behind so much. As far, I can imagine that people with younger children, those that would in kindergarten or first grade, those are some really important developmental years. I can imagine that those parents are probably really struggling still because their children miss that time being in a classroom. Because they're just so key. Like those years are such key foundational years for reading skills. That I can imagine that they're struggling to catch up.
I would imagine that the parent, like that time, I can imagine a very involved parent making up for a lot of the deficits in that time. But if you have a parent who's either just generally an apathetic person, which there are plenty of, or if you have a parent that is just you're busy, man, you got other things going on, you can't pay that much attention to your kid. And so I'm sure communities which are like more working class or impoverished were hit much harder, right?
Oh, definitely. Definitely. And that's true across the board, even pre-pandemic. Students that have a parent at home that read to them daily, that do, start them in preschool very young, where they start learning those foundational skills earlier. Those students statistically do better for the rest of their life. And so pandemic or no pandemic, parents that really involve their kids in literacy activities and play and preschool and things like that, they do better educationally. Students that like their preschool is very, very expensive. So if you can't afford to put your kid in preschool and they're showing up for kindergarten day one with very little literacy skills, they're already kind of behind. And that continues through high school. So for a long time, I stopped schooling or teaching while my son was in school, and I became a private tutor, and I worked for a tutoring company. And of course, you know, when you're paying $60 to $80 an hour for tutoring, these are some wealthy clients. So if their kid is behind, they are going to say, okay, we're going to go do some tutoring and we're going to get you caught up. And, you know, other parents just can't afford to do that. So,
yeah. So to follow the thread here, so you know, you kind of told us about start of pandemic, and then do you eventually find a pandemic norm routine? Because like, how much time were we talking about before kids went back to school? Is that like two? I have in my brain it was like 2 years, but was it that much?
It varied by location. So
Okay, yeah. So you're California, obviously. I don't think Florida closed the schools for very much at all. It was varied state to state, but in California, how long was it?
Even within California, it varied by school district even. So it just depended where you were. My county went back to school much earlier than say like the Bay Area, or even Sacramento versus I'm in the suburbs of Sacramento. We went back earlier, like a few months earlier. But we had special education had the option to go back sooner. So we did, I want to say like, it's hard to remember the exact dates now. We got out in April, we were dismissed. In February, I went back to the classroom.
Okay.
And at that point, it was optional if kids wanted to come in. We weren't making them come in. They had the choice. They could remain virtual or they could come in. That's when I was doing what we called hybrid instruction, where the school actually spent thousands and thousands of dollars on these high-tech cameras with microphones that would follow me around the classroom. It could show my whole whiteboard and screen. It would follow me around the classroom and pick up what everyone was saying in the classroom for the kids at home. So it was like they had the experience of being in the room. But I still had to monitor Zoom chat and things like that.
Oh, geez, yeah.
And it was not ideal by any means. That was rough.
So am I right that schools are, my understanding is schools are primarily funded through like local property taxes. So the more money's coming in through your zip code, maybe your school could afford to do these things, but schools in less privileged neighborhoods probably weren't able to get all the high-tech goodies.
No, probably not. Probably not. And our district, well, you know, and actually the district I was working in, the school I was working in was not necessarily, you know, like a socioeconomically low area, but the district itself was in areas, and they did get the same resources that my school did.
Okay.
So yeah, by the end of that school year, I think we did hybrid for the rest of that school year. And then we went back, I believe they went back in August. I started a new job after that. So it's like, I'm done with this thing. And that's when I got my new fully virtual position. But the school did go back after that summer.
So what's your sense?
Yeah.
What's your sense of how many, because I know that a teacher shortage is, of course, there's shortages in all types of fields right now, but that teacher shortage is very much a salient topic. Just in your world, how many people just quit because it became too much?
Oh, I know so many teachers quit that year.
Wow.
A lot of teachers that were nearing retirement were just like, I'm done.
And this is towards the end of the pandemic here, right? Like this last year or the one before that people were finally like, fuck it.
Even the one before, that's when teachers started quitting. And then it just got steadily worse. The environment just got steadily worse for teachers over time, and it's still not fantastic. Even more and more teachers are trying to find, what else can I do with my degree instead of teaching? And it's not because they don't love kids. Every teacher, every person I know that's an educator, I know there are bad teachers out there. I'm very aware of that. But every person that I've ever worked with has really just had such a love for working with youth. They love their job. What they don't like is all the other stuff about their job. It's like, as the pay and the work environment and having to deal with a lot of mandates and politics and testing. There's so many other aspects to our work besides just our day-to-day instruction material with kids that has made the profession unsustainable for a lot of people. And actually, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. I'm just going to pretend for a minute that I have no concept of what challenges teachers face. Besides, let's say I know that you're not really paid enough for the amount of value to provide to society. But other than that, I have no concept of the extracurricular challenges that you guys face. Why are people leaving? What's such a big deal right now, Rhonda?
Well, pay is a huge one. And of course, most people would say, like, well, if you really, and people do say this, well, if you really love the kids, you'll do it for the kids. And it's like, I have my own kid to feed. Like, the only reason I can remain a teacher right now is my son and I live with my parents. And so I don't have to worry about paying.
Hold on a second. I think in the editing, can we like roll that back and have it repeat a couple times there, Ryan?
Yeah, let's absorb that fact. Do you want to say, like, we can cut this out if you want, but do you want to say how much? Let's just go back. Maybe not your job right now, but when you were working for the public school, do you want to say how much that was? Are we talking around about like 40K?
No, I make more than that, but
okay.
I'd rather not say on air how much I make.
Sure.
But
you're in California.
Yes.
You're in California. It's a high cost of living area. And you're saying that you couldn't afford a place that would be a decent place to live for you and your son. And a car and insurance and all the other things of life.
Without having to commute a significant amount. Yeah, I
in Sacramento or something.
I can't find a 2-bedroom apartment within my price range. Then I need 2 bedrooms for me and my son. I couldn't find one within my price range that wouldn't like bankrupt me every month, basically.
Yeah. Just so people aren't thinking that like it's all good and you're driving a Honda Accord, but you'd rather be driving a BMW. Like, we're talking about base level middle class subsistence is not happening.
And you've been teaching for how long now, Rhonda?
Well, I started in 2009, and then I did that for a few years, teaching general education English, and ended up leaving because it was just really rough when my child was young, and I did tutoring. And then I got back into public schools in like 2016. Yeah.
So you've been a professional teacher for 15 years and don't make enough to afford your own place. I'd just like our listeners to let that sink in again.
Yeah. So, I mean, I technically could rent something, but it would take more than definitely like at least half of my paycheck every month.
50% of the income. That's not sustainable.
Yeah, no, it's not. I can do it because I live with my parents, and so I'm able to save that money and use it for other things and have a good quality of life. I would really like to have my own apartment. And I don't even need a house. I would like an apartment. I would like to not have to rely on that. But so that's a big thing. I've looked at donating plasma. I've looked at I started a proofreading course so that I could proofread on the side because I was an English major. And I could charge like $40 an hour for proofreading documents. I just took a catering job that I'm going to keep doing even after summer, just for extra money. I wish I didn't have to do those things. I would love just to be able to focus on teaching and just focus on that and not have to worry every month about like, am I going to get to zero this month? How long's my paycheck going to last? And I know a lot of teachers that, especially that are single, deal with this. So I think for a long time, teachers were married women. And so the low pay was subsidized by a spouse, now that more and more, especially more and more males are entering the profession, where now they've got the family to provide for, and there's more women that are not married that are like, yeah, this isn't really working for me. And that's such a huge thing. And I wish it wasn't. The amount of schooling that we have to go through, I have an undergraduate degree. I got my master's in education, and I went through two credential programs, one general education credential program that was 2 years, and then a special education credential program that was another 2 years. So combine all that education, that's 8 years of education that I did. And I'm not making $100,000 a year. I'm making way below that. And other professions that do that kind of schooling you would expect them to make like at least like 80-90,000 a year,
Oh yeah, minimally.
And in some states the starting pay for teachers is as low as 30,000 a year. So in California we're much higher, but for the cost of living it feels pretty equal.
It's huge.
Yeah. I think a lot of people focus on the moral failure of that, right? Which is like, hey, these people are providing this great service. Shouldn't they make more money? But it's also like it's a structural failure. Like even if you're just a hardcore selfish capitalist motherfucker, like that's your jam. To run the economy, you need well-educated people. And who do you want educating the populace? Do you want people who are strung out, who can't provide for their own families, who have to go get second jobs, many of whom, maybe people who are smart enough or have the expertise or have extra degrees, go look at the private sector and they say, hey, man, I can just go be an engineer somewhere else. Screw this. And take off. Wouldn't you rather have those people educating your children? Like, this is the thing that gets me, is it's not only like, it seems like you got the liberal, soft-hearted people over here that want the teachers to be paid more because teachers are nice people and they deserve it. And then you got the capitalist over here that want to squeeze it. It's like, it's bad for that too. It's bad for like any selfish reason you could imagine.
And going way back, the reason the public education system was started in America, if you study the history of public education, it was started to have an educated populace so that people could make informed decisions regarding their government, their democracy, civil life. That's why it was started in America. People were like, hey, we can't have a functional country if people can't read, if they're illiterate. So we need to start this education system. It's really important that we have it. And right now there are states, in order to not pay teachers more, they are just they're getting rid of the requirements to be a teacher, basically. Saying basically anyone with a bachelor's degree can just come in and teach, or in some cases, not even that. And that just blows my mind, because people think that teaching is babysitting, and it is so beyond that. Imagine inviting, 35-year-olds over to your house to babysit them and teach them how to read. Okay, no, that's not babysitting. Like, we actually are trained to do this. We know what we're doing. We went to school for this. We know how to educate. And you just throw any Joe Schmo into a classroom and say, teach these kids. They're not going to learn because they don't know what they're doing. And that's what's happening right now, because I'd like to say there's not a teacher shortage. There's a shortage of people who are willing to put up with this.
There's a teacher pay shortage. Yeah, it's ridiculous. The other thing that my mind just went to right there that is just gobsmacking is the combination of that you're saying there, that instead of increasing the funds available to pay qualified teachers, they're getting rid of the requirements. And then like the other prong of that, in response to I guess not even recent events anymore, what's become the new normal, is talking about arming them. So like there's actually a push to put uneducated people with guns in classrooms overseeing 35-year-olds. And anybody who's ever dealt with 35-year-olds, I'm sure can understand how irrationally angry they'll make you. And you want to give that untrained guy a gun?
Oh yeah, that Ryan, that is a whole other topic right there. The whole arming of teachers thing.
Whole other kettle of fish. Yeah, I do want to circle back to that, because that is a most salient fact about what's going on. And I also want to hear about what y'all's kids are experiencing in school because of that. But to round this point out, so besides the pay issue,
which
let's imagine
huge. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Massive.
So besides the pay issue, there is that safety issue. There, that's on the forefront of teachers' mind. There are safety issues about kids, or strangers bringing and harming schools. That's something I always thought about as a teacher. I think every single teacher you've ever met knows where every door, where every exit is. They know the fastest route. They know what's in their classroom that they could use to protect, we have all thought about that. That's not as big as a couple other things. Since the pandemic, discipline issues in school has become a really big deal for teachers across the country. If you pay attention to what teachers are saying, I don't know if it was kids were so used to being home and then we threw them back into class, but there's a lot of issues with just like respecting teachers and behaving well in class and coming to school to learn. And I had my fair share of discipline issues with students. Luckily, I had great administration that really backed me up. And when I needed help, then I could send my student to them and they would talk to them. And it was dealt with in a great way that I felt good about. And that protected my relationship with the student, because that's really important to me. But you have students that are just completely wilding out in class sometimes and just being really disrespectful and disruptive, and that's an issue if schools aren't handling that properly in a way that protects the student, and again, like, makes that relationship good, but also helps the teacher maintain a good classroom environment. You need both of those things. And what a lot of teachers are saying is they're not feeling supported in that area right now, and they're having to deal with it all themselves, and that's a problem.
Anecdotally, there's somebody that we all know, I'll omit her name here, but she was a special education teacher and had one student that had, I believe, leapt over a desk and like physically accosted her at one point, and then was following her around the parking lot. And I believe there were rape threats. And
oh my gosh.
Yeah, long story short, went to the administration and said, you need to get rid of this kid. Like, he's going to hurt somebody, specifically me. And they said, well, the parents, are threatening to sue for not providing him, and she quit the profession. Just isn't it? It's insanely smart and caring person, the kind of person you would absolutely want teaching your kids, and they just weren't backed up because I guess threat of litigation. They were more scared of that than they were scared of a teacher being assaulted, and didn't back her up. So that's at least one instance that I know of. That
is crazy to me. Yeah, and this is unfortunately not uncommon. So this is going on, and this is a relatively new thing. Like back in 2009, when I started teaching, there's no way. It's like some of the things that I've heard about happening in classrooms, like that would never ever have been tolerated. This is a fairly new phenomenon, and I think schools are just a little bit like overwhelmed. And maybe admin is overwhelmed, administration. And when I say admin, I mean principals, vice principals, and superintendents, things like that. I think they're also overwhelmed. They have a lot on their plate. But yeah, teachers are just not really, in general, feeling supported all the time by their administration. And another aspect really impacting teachers right now is the social aspect, the political aspect. So I know all of us have been hearing in the news lately about book bans, about what can teachers say in the classroom. Like there's Florida's very infamous "Don't Say Gay" bill that was actually I don't know if a lot of people know this. At first, it was kindergarten through third grade, then it was extended to eighth grade. And Florida's not the only state that this is happening in. It's just the most well-known example where teachers are afraid to say things or talk about things for fear of losing their credential or getting fired. So when you start censoring teachers, like, okay, can maybe deal with bad pay, who got discipline issues, but now you're policing us. And we're scared for our jobs, then now you throw that on there, and it's just too much. It's just too much altogether. So
just a throw in on that. So that's a conversation that I've been involved in with a few people that are more or less supportive and of that speech limitation, which, and just to play devil's advocate, so what I would hear from that argument is, well, there's no reason to be talking about sex in a kindergarten. I mean, through eighth grade is pretty wild. That's wild.
Yeah.
But let's pretend like that wasn't happening and that it was only through third grade, because I still think that's pretty dumb. Let's pretend that they're not talking about not letting you talk about sexes and genders and sexual identity through eighth grade, because I think we can all agree that fucking eighth graders are having questions. All right, guys.
Totally. Yes.
But let's say it was just third grade, and that, well, why wouldn't you support banning talking about fucking in all its manifestations? Is it like
the bill goes so far beyond talking about that? That's actually not what the bill is at all. It bans teachers from
which
using
bill are we
pronouns.
Talking about, just to be clear?
The Florida's.
Okay.
I can't remember the number. It's It's been dubbed the "Don't Say Gay" bill, but it also bars teachers and school staff from using students' preferred gender pronouns. It's not. It's very vaguely worded. It's extremely vaguely worded. So it's kind of resulted in this overcautiousness, like certain books that there's a book called Tango. It's about a true story of two penguin dads at a New York zoo raising their egg and baby chick together.
Oh, I thought that one was fiction. Those are actually two penguin dads.
It's a true story. Yes.
Okay.
It's
There's a Parks and Rec episode about it. It's pretty great.
Yeah. Okay. So some teachers, well, now in Florida, that is just out of the libraries completely.
Can't discuss two
Real life
avian
humans.
men
Yeah. So I mean, it's
raising an
no,
egg.
and this is what's ridiculous about this bill is no teachers are talking about sex to kindergartners. Okay, no teachers are even through third grade. They're not talking about that. What this law has banned people from talking about is like, okay, Johnny in our class here has two dads. Oh, a kid has a question about it. Nope, can't talk about that. You know, like,
Yeah, so this is what I assumed was going on. Hey Ryan, I'm getting bleed over something. I don't know if TV or
Oh, something in the background.
yeah, something
Hey,
in the
guys,
background. Yeah, so I wish, I do wish we had somebody here who was like super conservative and could accurately represent their viewpoint. But from what
Yeah.
I hear them talking about, it's like it seems like they're imagining. They're like, hey, Billy, when two dudes get together and they want to fuck, they fucking fuck in the ass and suck cock, and they love it. And maybe you should try that too. But
Exactly.
what did maybe I should have
Yeah.
kept this family friendly because that's a good discussion. But what I imagine is happening is maybe just what you said, which is yes, in the world there are some people that have two dads, and
Yeah,
that's okay. And that's basically all
exactly.
you're saying, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
But now
and
you
like
can't say that. Now you
you
can't
can't say
so.
that. Yeah.
And how is that banned? Like what
It's
umbrella
illegal.
does that put what umbrella is that put under? Like how would you even
Well, there are a lot of fights against this law saying that it's unconstitutional because it limits free speech, which makes sense to me. So yeah, so the law has made it not only so that teachers can, and I might be wrong on this, I know they are scared about potentially losing their credential or losing their job, but I think there might even be fines involved, or for violating.
I
And
believe I
think
did
in
hear
some
that.
states,
Yeah.
So that's a really scary thing. So you can just imagine, like, oh gosh, no teacher is actively like trying to make your child gay or trans, okay? Are there because we love kids, we want to teach. We we talk about different subjects sometimes, but no one is like pushing a gay agenda that that I've ever met. Um, so yeah, this is scary. This
Yep.
is scary territory to be policed for what you're saying. And it goes beyond that, talking about certain social issues, talking about, just what's going on in the world. Everything's so politicized right now and so polarized that teachers are afraid, well, if I say something, I'm going to get a parent complaint, I can be fired, I could lose my credential. And this is even happening outside of Florida. This is happening in a lot of states and places where teachers are just scared. And so that's a really, really big deal. And that's another factor that's making people rethink, like, is this the right profession for me?
Now, are you affected in California by this, or are you just speaking to like because I know Florida's one example, but in Tennessee, I believe we have a similar bill, and I'm sure this is going to happen over every single freaking southern state. But is it just limited to those states, or are you saying there's like a general chilling effect that even you in California, even though you may not be?
I feel it. I'm cautious about what I say, especially since I'm working in Zoom with kids, and so the parents are there. They hear me, so I'm always viewed. I'm always being listened to and watched, and I'm very, very aware of everything that I say. And let me tell you, kids ask a lot of questions. They want to know about everything. And can I always answer them honestly? No, I can't, because I'm like, I don't know what your parents' ideological beliefs are. I'm not stepping on any toes. I can ask your parents about that.
So what would you say
love to have this conversation? But
what would you say to a parent that's like, look, man, how about Like, I don't understand why this is such a problem. How about you teach them reading, writing, and arithmetic? And when it comes to social issues, like, we'll talk about that stuff at home. What's the counter argument to that?
So you have to think that kids are not just little robot machines that come in and sit down and do math. You know, they are complex humans with lives and thoughts, and they come to your classroom with a host of issues, and you deal with that every day. So I've been that teacher that kids have come to be like, hey, I think, you know, I think I'm gay. I don't have anyone to talk to about this.
Oh,
Or,
wow.
you know, my parents are immigrants and I'm scared about what's happening right now with ICE and everything. I've had that conversation. Um, Kids come to me and tell me that they're pregnant, or I think I might be pregnant and I need birth control, but I don't want my parents to know about it because they won't let me, you know, or I'm scared of what they'll do. And so they're human beings that have questions about life, and you have to be able to talk to them about these things because you might be the only person that they can talk to. And so when you prevent them from doing that, that's problematic, you know, and parents might say, well, yeah, I should know. And that's
Arguably, you should
and,
know, but maybe you don't.
yeah, and it is a hard thing to say. I think it depends on the situation. There's no black and white thing here. It's not an easy thing to talk about, but schools are like little microcosms. They're like miniature cities. You've got like a high school has 3,000 people on campus. That's the size of a small town. So you're all there for 8 hours a day, and things come up, you know. And so that's why you can't really separate the two. They exist together. So.
Yeah, well, and I can't imagine that you know that dilemma. Let's take. I would think if a kid's coming to you and they're saying, I can't talk to my parents about this, you would absolutely have to imagine there might be some repercussions at home should you go to the parents. Hey, little Tina's pregnant. Can I talk to you about this? And like, I totally get a parent that's like, that's a major deal. I would want to know if my 14-year-old is pregnant. Totally understand it. And then I also understand your side of the issue where you go, if you know, she obviously afraid to get outed to her parents about this. And maybe there's good reason. I don't know. Maybe daddy beats her. Maybe who the hell knows,
Yeah,
right? And so
exactly.
then you
And
would
you
feel
don't
culpable.
know. Exactly.
I think
So
I feel like an immediate kind of counter to that is going to be, well, should teachers be trusted with that kind of responsibility and that kind of role? And I guess I'm curious what your thoughts on that. But I mean, my you know, my personal dialogue is it doesn't matter if they should be, they're going to be.
they're going to
I guess
be.
yeah, that's kind of how it is, right? Like, yeah,
Yeah.
honestly, you probably shouldn't be. It's not really your training and it's not really your expertise, but that doesn't matter because you are that other adult figure, whether you want to be or not.
Right. And actually it is part of our training. So part of your credential program is to deal with to learn about a diverse populations. How do you manage these these things that come up? Like, what do you do? A part of our training is child psychology. So we take a lot of psychology classes. We know about how to work with students that have had trauma, that are going through like complex social issues. We are trained to deal with that and how to work with the school to help students and to teach students that are experiencing, you know, very complex things in their life. And so it is kind of put upon us, actually, even in our training. And so here's another wild thing on that same vein. I was reading an article the other day. I think I sent you guys a link to it, and I could pull it up. That there was, I want to say it's Tennessee or Arkansas, somewhere in the South, that in the teacher training, they wanted to remove the words inequality from teacher training. Would have to look up the other things that they wanted to ban from the teacher training, but things like words like equality. I can't remember what the other ones are right now off the top of my head. But when I saw that article, I was like, what? Like, how can you just ban teachers from learning about how to deal with this? Because it is such a huge part of our job, like a huge part. And just to say like, oh, we're just not going to teach teachers how to deal with that anymore is insane to me, because you have to, not all kids are, white Christian middle class kids, and
I can imagine, for people who are still, on the fence about whether it's okay maybe to say there are such things as same-sex couples that have children and that's okay. I'd love to actually read about the history of it, but imagine the civil rights movement. And, it's the same freaking thing as being able to say, some people have a white dad and a black mommy, and that's okay. And and to just acknowledge that these things are happening in the world. And yeah, how can you talk about the history of America without equality, equity, things like this? Like,
exactly.
and the freaking fact that, look, yes, maybe something is going to be said by a teacher in a classroom that is not your preferred worldview. Like, I had an atheist teacher who was somewhat outspoken about that. And I had Christian teachers that were somewhat outspoken about that. But that didn't turn every kid freaking magically atheist. But they're exposed to the fact that these people exist in the world. There are atheists and these are their ideas, right? And then they'll become their own person out of that. Like, what is this notion that I just wonder if you want to have them in this hermetically sealed freaking bubble until they're 18, they're going to be in the world. They're going to meet gay people. Hello.
Exactly. And they're going to be exposed to things other than what's in your household. And like, I was raised in a pretty like Christian conservative household. Not one time did my parents ever be like, you're learning what in school? They saw all my work. They saw the books that I was reading. They were never even raised an eyebrow, and they're pretty conservative. My mom's from Mississippi, and she was never like, I don't want you reading 1984. Or Brave New World or anything that we were learning about. That was never a thing. My parents never were like, oh, I don't want you reading that or learning about that. You're learning about the civil rights movement? There's actually people who don't want to teach real history right now because they want to take real history, American history, out of textbooks. Anything that talks about race, they want to take that out and just gloss over it.
It is absolutely wild to me that the idea that the extended slavery of Black people and the legal systemized suppression of people based on the color of their skin could have lasting effects economically that have persisted for up to 80 years after the legal end of that institution, that is somehow controversial is right. Just wild to me that you would ever like it. People, I've heard it, like that was forever ago. Like, dude, 80 years is nothing. And that was the end of legal segregation.
Yes.
I don't think it was even 80 years. It was late 60s, right? So 70 years. Yeah. Wild that would be somehow controversial that has had some kind of lasting effect on relations between people in the country. Holy shit, man.
And these effects are measurable. Like the outcomes for African Americans in medical care are worse. African American women they get different types of care. Like implicit bias isn't someone's fucking opinion that they made up. Like that's a real measurable thing in experiments that you can come up with, and then you can prove how that affects things in the real world. So if you're against like the types of things that you've been talking about, you're against just talking about facts that exist in the world. And this is what the Scopes monkey trial was about. And, is like, I don't care. Like, society doesn't have to respect your desire to shield people from facts. We don't, like, I'm sorry. I don't, like, there's this movement about, oh, well, shouldn't the parents have a say about what's going on in school? We want to give control to the parents. Well, like, maybe not. Like, if you're a Christian, you want that kind of control. Imagine, a small Muslim community up in Dearborn, Michigan, that wants to basically run a madrasa. They would prefer that, sure, but that's not the type of institution we're running here.
Exactly.
It's America.
And
if you don't like it, leave.
Okay, so I found the article because I had to pull it up because it was going to bug me.
Oh,
so
please.
It's the state of Georgia they decided to remove diversity, equity, and inclusion from its teacher preparation standards.
What does that mean, from its teacher preparation standards?
So like what I said, we have to go through a bunch of training in order to become teachers to teach diverse populations. That's a big part of your teacher coursework. So they have taken those standards out of their teacher preparation requirements. So learning about like teaching diverse populations, equity training, or inclusion. So just those, I could read more about it, but I could find the rest of the article. But
also
yes,
just wild, yeah, that the
It's
whole
just
diversity,
crazy to me.
equity, inclusion department has turned into this boogeyman throughout. And I get that it can be frustrating. Like, we had a D&I department at my college that we went to, that Ryan and I went to, that arguably potentially maybe did more harm than good with their public presentations and stuff. I think the existence of the department behind the scenes, when people had to go to it to have problems resolved, probably had a better success rate. Like, their forward facing stuff at our school was not just cringeworthy, but actively offensive. Like, they would have auditorium presentations where they basically accused every white male in the room of being a rapist and a racist. Like, it was really bad. And I say that as somebody who believes in the mission of diversity,
Yeah.
equity, and inclusion, that it was like, wow, man, you're coming on really strong with that shit. But the fact
Yeah.
that but then another branch of that department, I want to define what the diversity there is. I got a diversity and inclusion scholarship, like $1,500 a year or a semester, because I was a dad. Like, that's what that department does, is it brings together the circle of people who aren't white, single Christian males in our example, a maritime college. Just me being married with kids made me part of that diversity circle,
Right.
because most students didn't have kids. I was in a different
Right.
class. So that's like,
And so
I don't understand why it's such a boogeyman.
Right. And I just want to clarify, like, this right here. So from reading the article, it's not the diversity, equity, inclusion department that they want to remove those three, specifically those three words, because they're so-called ambiguous terms from rules that guide colleges that train educators. So
They're ambiguous concepts.
Yeah. So when I was in my teacher preparation program, I had to take a whole course on how to teach students that are English language learners, for example. And I had to take a course on how to teach diverse populations. We had to take special education courses that talks about inclusion. So now those three words, like diversity, equity, and different socioeconomic backgrounds, you take courses on that. So now you can no longer use those three terms in those courses.
That
Yeah.
is wild. Waging war against words. The thing I don't. It seems like this show regularly verges on turning into a political show, just because I feel like you can't really divert it from the streams of the subjects we're talking about. But it never ceases to amaze me that the party that states that it's in favor of like uncontrolled free speech and like like America, the First Amendment, rah rah rah, we can say whatever we want, would wage war on words, like literal particular words, because it's also just totally self-defeating. You can take words out and people will just come up with new words to represent the same concept, like yeet.
Exactly.
Well, I think that's where the failure around this, it's also analogous to the current like trans issue to me is so for example, within the whole now salient for some reason like trans debate, I was listening to Masha Gessen, who's a trans man that I usually listen to on Russia issues, but he felt he had to speak on this, excuse me, and was saying like, look, a lot of these issues are not like these specific things, like should we give a child puberty blockers? These are not resolved within the trans community. There's a lot of, so that is to say, there's a lot of legitimate debate. There's a lot of reasons why someone might go, like I don't know that I would. And then I think what happens is you get like a liberal or conservative viewpoint, and everybody digs their heels in. It's all one thing, it's all one the other. But so for diversity, equity, inclusion, I think we should all be able to agree those are values which we want to espouse and live up to. And there is also legitimate debate to be had in there. I understand why some people from some diversity, equity, and inclusion, administrators, some of them are dumbasses, some of them have bad ideas, right? And we should be able to talk about how do we accomplish these goals without just everybody digging their heels in and becoming like a racist or a libertine on one side or the other. We have this failure on so many issues where it seems like we're talking about, but so like we can talk about say trans issues, but at the point that you're like trans people shouldn't exist and I don't want my children to hear that they exist, well then you're out of the discussion in my mind. And so here, if you just don't think we should have diversity, equity, and inclusion like at all, you're out of the discussion. But I think we as people who generally fall on like the left side of that issue, could we do a better job of making people feel validated? Like, I understand you got a little bit of concern here. Let's talk about the methods which this is being accomplished.
Well, as far as this goes, what's happened, the teacher training, I look at that as, how is that going to affect children? Like how is not training teachers to deal with diverse populations, for example, like will they find a workaround for that? Or are they just not going to teach that at all anymore? What's the impact of that going to be? And then are you going to have teachers coming in not knowing how to teach diverse populations? Or like that's
what's going to happen.
Me. Like what's going to be the effect of that in Georgia public schools? And is this happening anywhere else? I just think about all of these things. I think about the impact on children. And so when you have, and again, this is another thing that's keeping educators out of the profession or quitting the profession, as how is that impacting students over time and the education system over time? And what's the long-term impact of this going to be in like 30 years?
But shouldn't you use your time and health and mental sanity and physical body to shield your students from the harmful aspects of society, Rhonda? Isn't that your role as somebody who's chosen this profession? Yes or no?
Oh.
No?
No, I didn't say no.
That's really the expectation that's largely put on teachers. I feel like, though, like not only to sacrifice your sanity and financial health for the kids, but like you actually hear that, that the teachers should be if a shooter enters the room or whatever, the teachers will physically shield the students with their bodies. Like fucking what, bro? Like that's not my job.
But they do.
Sure, they do. And in the situation, I probably would. But the fact that it's being said out loud as something that should be expected, like, dude, that's wild. Like, we can do literally anything but try to address kids getting shot in school, like, from external perspectives. Wow.
And yeah, just a little side tangent on that. Every year, and during like 2 weeks before school, you come and you do training. They have professional development training, and every year for a couple days they send in, like, at least at the school that I used to work at, they would send in like a safety trainer to train you what to do in an active shooter situation, and train us to go into our classroom and look around and what would you use as a weapon. Okay, there's your fire extinguisher right there by the door. You could grab the fire extinguisher and hit the person in the head. Like, we had paid somebody to come in to teach us how to fight off a gunman. Okay, this happened every year that I was a teacher. This is
Yeah, well, since we're on this, let's drill down on this fun fact of American society right now. Is so when Columbine was 99.
Yeah,
and Columbine's
Columbine
was the first time that I remember. I graduated high school 2003, so that's and I remember leaving. I think we had a drill that I can remember for active shooter before I graduated high school, and then I remember coming back to school and seeing that they had as an adult, and seeing they had cameras and fences, and it just looked like depressing. It looked like a gulag compared to this big open campus and this nice sort of like college campus type feeling. So yeah, what has changed? So what's the challenges on students there, and then the challenges on parents? And Ryan, I wondered if you two have any experience like discussing this with your kids and how that's affected them and you.
I have had many students, especially younger students, that have a lot of fear and anxiety about going to school. So every time, like, I used to do a lot of tutoring on the side to supplement my income. And I had some students that were like 5th, 6th grade that I was tutoring, that anytime there was like a shooting that was talked about, or every time that they had to do an active shooters drill, that they would cry and shake and be in tears. It was terrifying for them. They couldn't go to school for like a week sometimes, every time that it happened, because they were terrified. They had a lot of fear and anxiety about being at school, every time that they heard about something on the news. And every time that they had to do a shooter drill at school, they would have to go like to the counseling office because they would be like shaking. They were so scared. It really impacts kids, I think, more than we realize. Some kids are going to be more impacted. They're more sensitive and more prone to anxiety and things. But yeah, it's a scary thing for them.
I mean, it's a scary thing. It's definitely just become an accepted part of American society that, okay, it's not likely, but it's very possible that older teenager or adult will rampage through your school today and with automatic weapons, and that happens sometimes. So just in case, we're just considered a natural disaster like a fire and earthquake. So we're just gonna take steps to prepare about that.
Yeah, I've heard that argument that it's unlikely, and I go, well, yeah, man, but that doesn't, like, does the unlikelihood of it explain that to a 5-year-old? Like, yeah, we're doing this every year, but don't worry, honey. Statistically, you're not likely to get shot in the head. Like, the kid don't freaking understand it. So the social impact of this thing is way above maybe the actual, like, if you ever look at number of children killed per year, but the social impact is tremendous, I would imagine.
Yeah, and you don't just do one drill a year. Like, right after Columbine,
Really?
At our high school, we did like maybe one active shooter drill a year. No, you're talking about, in some cases, doing like at least 3.
God almighty, really?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and like it when we were in Vacaville, the kids they were in portable classrooms too, and yeah, they did several shooter drills a year and talked about how they would close the door, and there were metal shutters on the walls, but I mean, come on, it's a portable, the thing's made of damn cardboard.
Yeah.
The thing that really blew my mind there was actually at that campus when they started, it was like a big open field, sidewalk access, and basically an open field with buildings on it, California school style, for those who are familiar with California schools. It's not like one building where you go from door to door. It's a bunch of small buildings that basically each have a small number of classrooms or portables. And by the time they left, I think it was their second or third year, they put a chain link fence with like 2 or 3 gates around the whole thing, which, besides being aesthetically awful and made the whole place look, and I'm sure feel, a lot more like a prison, even if not all the kids picked up on that, it blew my mind from a security standpoint, because it's not going to just stop anybody who's determined to get inside the fence, but it does limit egress points in case somebody actually did assault the school. Like, all you've made is
Totally.
a cage.
Exactly.
That blew my mind, that the security theater just trumped any rational, like, no, dude, if something happens, earthquake, fire, gas explosion, active shooter, you wanted these kids to be able to scatter.
Leave.
And they bottlenecked it in like 4
Yeah.
places, tiny little doors, like just man doors. And that decision just continues to floor me that they did that.
So the high school that I worked at up until 2021, it was a beautiful, huge, open campus. It had a huge, giant quad, backed up to like a nature reserve. There's trees, just really beautiful campus. And I just found out last week that they're planning on putting a full fence the whole way around it, with just a few exit points. And it was like, that's so, I had the exact same thought as you, Ryan, because when I was working there, what did I always tell my kids we were going to do? If there's a situation, we were right next to the parking lot. I was like, we're leaving, we're going that way. Okay. There's a neighborhood right there. We're not staying on campus and hiding in our classroom. We're going out the door. We're going to that parking lot. We're running across the street. Now we won't be able, that's not an option anymore, because now they're putting a fence around the whole thing. I was like, that's crazy, because that's actually what we were trained to do when we had those trainers come to tell us what to do. They're like, if you can leave. But now they're putting a fence around it. I'm like, okay, that's a little terrifying. And plus it does make it feel really weird.
To me, Uvalde was the ultimate indictment of every, I think the anti-gun control crowd proposes solutions perennially that aren't really solutions, but they can kind of get away with saying, well, if we only did such and such, but the libs won't let us do it, sort of a thing. But there you had controlled ingress and egress, and you had famously, hundreds of cops show up, and just every potential solution to this failed. I actually work with a guy on my boat who's from Uvalde, and
Wow.
to talk about the ground level effect of that, like, it was like a nuclear bomb going off in that community. They are wrecked. They are heartbroken. They are all psychologically damaged, because if you didn't have a kid die, it's a small town, you knew somebody whose kid died. You have lost faith in government and institutions to be able to protect your children. Imagine being a child and being asked to go back to school, for God's sake. And then, of course, it's broadcast, and it affects the if kids hear about it, now this is something I have to think about and go to school. And then you're trying to and then for teachers as well. And there is no, we're talking about how silly these measures and responses are, and there's just no good way to handle an AR-15. Let's say you had a very capable, some freaking ex-Marine running around the place you're still gonna have a kid in there with an assault weapon that is able to murder several people before some brave sharpshooter can take them down. And ain't nothing. that's a problem. So
Yeah,
yeah.
I feel in general, I feel like this kind of goes to a larger issue with access to statistics and like quote unquote factual information about events countrywide, like COVID being another example. There was a lot going around like, oh, it only has a 1% death rate. Yeah, like, yeah, okay, that's true, but that doesn't, there's no way to account for the knock-on effects of that, the grief and the loss of humans, of human capital, if you want to look at it from a purely economic perspective, which you're saying there, that yeah, okay, however, let's be completely cold. Compared to the number of kids that are in America, very few children died at Uvalde. Yes, that's true. If you want to look at it from a statistical standpoint, very few children are killed in school shootings per year. Though that guess it's actually is the number, shootings is the number one cause of death for children in America at that point. So that at this point, so that's cool. But okay, it's still a very small absolute number. Yeah, all right, that's true. That doesn't change that every one of those deaths or injuries reverberates through the whole community, man. Like you were saying, I'm sure Uvalde is wrecked emotionally, financially, emotional. I already said emotionally, psychologically. Just every time these things happen, it devastates the community, the whole, and then you get insult on top of injury, like the whole Alex fucking Jones bullshitting about Sandy Hook for years. Like, holy God, man. And the collective impact that this has on our national psychology, that you would ever just say this is something that we can sort of allow to happen and just like militarize the schools, like that's a solution. Let's militarize the schools more, that'll help.
No.
Like, is that really like what we're after as
No.
a society? Is prison guards at the gates to schools?
Yeah, like 9/11 is a good analogy. That was 3,000-ish people, and we spent $2 trillion and turned the world upside down for them. But you might say, oh, that's irrational, we shouldn't have done it. But I think you just have to take into account, like, humans are primed to experience these fears and dangers in a certain way, and we just couldn't as a country like let people think, well, it's possible your airplane gets blown up. Like, you can't have that as a standard. So Rhonda, we kind of talked about, let me see, we had a few categories of things that are pushing people out of the profession or making it harder and worse than it needs to be. The physical danger, the financial, and then the feelings that you're being hushed. I want to see if you have any ideas about possible solutions, or at least avenues that could be taken on there. So I'm curious, in retrospect, do you think, as much as I find Ron DeSantis to be a fairly odious creature, do you think the Florida model, where they basically didn't close the schools, is my understanding, was the right move? Because the narrative over there is a bunch of sissy liberals that were too scared and incompetent, and now that was just that everything that happened in California and elsewhere was a total overreaction, and it was actually worse for the kids, and that Florida did a better job. Do you think there's some credence to that in retrospect?
I don't think there's any way to really answer that, because who knows what could have happened if we hadn't closed the schools. How many kids would have gotten COVID? How many parents or grandparents would have died as a result?
Couldn't we get that data out of Florida? And my understanding is the data is not too bad. But
so I don't know what the data. I don't know what the data is. Mm-hmm. So I couldn't really speak to that. Okay. I don't know if we did the right or the wrong thing. Maybe we did do the wrong thing. I have no idea. What really I think we just have to look at is what's done is done. Now we kind of know going forward, if this happens again, if hopefully it doesn't, but if it were to happen again, what would we do differently? What could we improve upon and do better? I think that's just kind of what we have to do with the information
Yeah,
that
so
we have now.
COVID 2, the sequel comes out, or COVID 20. Yeah, so COVID the sequel drops. It's the hottest album. What do you think? What do you think maybe would be this education system's response now if you had a similar respiratory virus? And then what maybe do you think should be done?
I think it really varies on where you live. I think like my county is a fairly conservative county that I live in. I think that they might take a more Florida approach. Maybe have kids wear masks and maybe make some smaller class sizes and social distancing and things like that. I don't think that they would take kids out of school again. But I think some places, maybe like San Francisco or Los Angeles, or more densely packed cities, they're still, to this day, there are still a lot of people there, like students wearing masks in class.
Yeah, but would it be better because they
really
have
better.
like systems in place now that are
I think
good?
so. I think so. I think now they would kind of know, like, okay, so we could handle this a lot more effectively than we did when it was like you're just all of a sudden thrown into it with a moment's notice.
Yeah.
There's a lot more in place to handle this more efficiently.
And besides just the tech of everybody having already figured out Zoom and then how to fill out certain attendance forms, are there lessons that were learned in just like how to keep kids engaged and actually learning in that sort of system?
Yes. Since then, and now I teach 100% virtual, right?
Okay.
So everything that I do now, I have to think about that. Like, how am I going to keep a 9-year-old engaged for 30 minutes? And they're going to learn something by the end of this lesson. Like, I have a goal in mind, and I also am not teaching a full class. Yes, I'm working with kids in small groups. That's much more effective than having a whole class on Zoom at the same time.
Yeah, of course.
So that's might be a good way to go about it, is just doing small groups and just changing the model a little bit. But yeah, I don't know what they would, as a whole, what educators would do if this were to happen again.
I didn't even think about class size, but like class size is such an issue in person,
yes.
But on Zoom with a wall of kids, and what you might even not notice, the one kid's gone off, and then what do? Do you yell at hey Jimmy, are you there? And try to bring him back at night.
So, actually, you just brought up another thing for teachers. Class size is a huge issue in education. What happened was in 2008 with the financial crash, so going way back, this is my first year as a student teacher, was 2009. That's when I started. I show up to my first day of student teaching. I was pregnant with my son, and I go into a portable. There are 37 eighth graders.
Oh, Jesus. Wow.
In a portable. Yeah, that was my first teaching assignment. Okay. And then I asked the teacher, I was like, is it always like this? And he's like, no, this is new. Before 2008, they had a cap, 25 students per class.
Okay.
But they had to fire so many teachers. There was massive teacher layoffs. Because of the recession. There were massive cuts in education.
Just less tax money coming in.
Yes.
Okay.
And so a lot of teachers were laid off during the recession. And yeah, they just had to combine classes because they couldn't afford as many teachers. So they just made classroom sizes larger. My second teaching assignment was 9th grade English. I show up, I had 42 9th graders. Some kids didn't have desks. And I asked the teacher, I was like, what was this like a couple years ago? She's like, I've never seen this before
some kids didn't have desks.
Yeah, they were standing up at the back of the classroom. Um, and eventually
Wow.
we moved some kids around to other classes and got their schedules worked out so that I think we ended up with 38 kids in the class. It's a big difference teaching 25 kids versus 38. It's huge, and ideally for me in general education, 20 kids is an ideal class size. 20 to 25. Beyond that, it's so much more difficult. Classroom management is more difficult. Just getting them to a state where they can learn effectively, but also just being able to help kids that are struggling. If it's just you in the classroom, if you don't have any aides helping, and you usually don't at the high school level, um, how do you get to everybody, in a 1 hour block of time, every kid that needs help doing something. I was an English teacher, and there were lots that were struggling readers, ninth graders that are reading at a second, third grade reading level, and I've got to help them and help the kids that are really advanced. And and I've got 38 kids in the classroom, all with questions, and it was really terrible. It was a big reason that I was like, you know what, I don't think can do this right now. I was stressed out of my mind. By that point, I had an 8-month-old at home. And I was staying up till 2, 3 in the morning grading essays every day because I was teaching 3 class periods. So 3 English classes, high school English classes, and I would be up all night long, like grading papers and things like that. And I was so stressed that I was
For a
like,
salary that couldn't get you a place to live.
Oh, this was when I was student teaching, so I was not getting paid anything.
Wow.
Yeah. Student teachers don't get paid. And I did that for a year and a half. It's part of becoming a teacher is you have to do student teaching and you do not get compensated. So just think about that.
Yeah, like having to do student teaching, that makes sense, but not getting paid at all for it.
Yeah.
Wow.
So so there's that. And I was like, I think I need to put this teaching thing on hold for a while until my son is a little bit older. And that's what I did. Because when you're a student teacher, you work with a master teacher. You do all the teaching essentially, but they're there to, like, if you have questions and stuff, and they help you. And she actually told me she had been teaching for about 16 years at this point, and she was awesome. She was such a great teacher. And she looked me in the face and she said, if you really want to do this, you're crazy. Get out now.
Wow.
She said that to me. And she's like, if I could go back in time, I would do something else.
Wow.
And I was like, and I was so stressed out of my mind. I was going to school full time still, student teaching all day, going to school at night to finish my credential. And I had an 8-month-old. And I was a single parent. So, and I had help from my parents, but I was like, okay, I'm going to listen to you, because what is my life right now? This is insane. And I tried to get away from teaching. I started my own tutoring business. I took that teaching credential and did anything else that I could with it for as long as I could. But eventually I was like, you know what? I miss the kids too much. I loved the students. I love them so much. They were my reason for showing up every day. They were just so amazing. And so eventually I was like, you know what? I miss the kids too much. I'm going to get back into teaching in a classroom. And I'm glad I did. And I went the special ed route, where the class sizes are a little bit smaller. There's more work in other areas, but long story short, classroom size is a huge deal that people don't think about. So when you have a teacher shortage and you don't have enough staff for your school, that means your kids' classrooms are going to be overfilled. So they're not only going to be overfilled, but they might have an unqualified teacher on top of that doesn't know how to handle 40 kids in the classroom. They never took a classroom management course, which is one of the many courses you have to take in teacher training.
Well, even if you could manage it, to me, the obvious effect of that is just the bottom drops out. Like you were saying, that kids that need it, and I was listening to this really cool talk by Malcolm Gladwell that was kind of identifying this problem now structurally, as he was saying, like coming out of World War II, we put a lot of money, or even before that, put a lot of money into being the best at the highest institution. So think Yale, Ivy League stuff, because if you could develop a few people that could make a nuclear bomb, you were on top. But, and he analogies that to, makes an analogy to like basketball, like that you can have one star player and they will carry it. But he says, society now, because we're so technological and everything's so integrated, it's more like football, meaning that think of NASA putting together a spaceship, and if one guy didn't screw in a couple of bolts right, it doesn't matter how smart the person was at the top. This low-level guy has to be doing his job correctly. And so we can no longer afford to let the bottom drop out and just count on everybody at the top to carry us forward. Like it worked at a certain point in time in history, but it no longer works. Now, I'm struck wondering what the roadblock is, and I don't know if you'll know this, but I think if my sense is, if you polled most people, even down in very conservative places like Texas, they would say, yes, we should pay teachers more. Yes, we should have smaller classroom size. I believe that, yes, I would be willing to pay a little bit more tax for that. I'll bet you that's like an 85% issue.
I think it's that third one that people don't want to do. Like around here, yeah, if you poll people, they'll say, yeah, we should have smaller sizes and teachers could pay more. But our school levy failed this year. People did not vote for it.
No shit.
Yeah, people won't vote for the taxes. It's wild.
Huh.
I know a lot of things have been wild today. It's my favorite adjective.
That is this episode. Is that really what's going on? People are just not willing to pay a little bit more money to get those benefits.
It wasn't even an increase. There were a bunch of signs all over in Vancouver, Washington saying, vote no on the school levy. These teachers want to use it to turn your kids gay. And it wasn't even an increase in taxes. It was to maintain the previous levy. And there was this wild, and it didn't actually say the kids are turning the teachers are turning the kids frogs gay. It didn't actually say that, but it was definitely that color scheme. You know what I mean? And they wouldn't even maintain it, and they're having to lay off a bunch of teachers and cut a bunch of programs this year because people didn't vote to maintain it at the level it was already at. So then they had to put out a new school levy this year, which is slightly lower, and cut a bunch of programs. And our programs up here aren't bad. They have a band, they have an orchestra, but I'm sure they're largely funded by the teachers, because that's how those programs actually work. Like my wife has been working as a teacher's aide, just volunteer this last year, doing art programs, also doing some general stuff, but she really ran with the art programs, and she just bought all the shit, man. Like they don't have any money for supplies.
Can I tell, do you want to hear something else wild?
Of course. I love wild shit. That's what today's about.
What you're given, the resources you're given as a teacher, you're given a classroom, a whiteboard, some desks, chairs, maybe a projector, computer, a laptop.
What about one of those That's TVs with the VHF on the cart? Do you guys get one of those?
So, we used to. Now we at least have some projectors, or some teachers have smart boards, but that's it. Maybe some you're given a limited amount of copy paper for you to print worksheets. Okay, each department is given a set amount, and so you have to stay within your amount of paper, otherwise you have to go out and get it yourself. Every other thing, down from pencils to markers, scissors, I purchased. So I just last year alone, and this is even virtual, I spend well over $1,000 a year on classroom supplies. Can I tell you how much you're allowed to deduct on your taxes as a teacher?
Please.
I'm sorry, there's a limit?
$250.
Wow, I thought it was 400.
There's
Even that was
there's a
insane.
limit to stop those greedy teachers from making shit up and getting a tax break.
I'm not shitting you at all. $250 is how much I'm allowed to deduct on my federal taxes. And
Anything out
I
of
spend
that's
over
got-
$1,000 a year.
Holy shit. And that's not for fancy shit, right? Like you're literally just making sure that kids who didn't bring pencils because their parents never got around to buying for them have one.
Well, when I was in the classroom, I would buy, scissors, markers, colored pencils, different types of paper so that we could do projects in class, poster boards, tissues, hand sanitizer. I got things to make the classroom not look like a prison cell. So I would, put things up on the walls and make it look nice. Just you're not given any kind of stipend or something like that. Like, okay, here's like, $500 a year for you to spend on supplies for your classroom. Nothing like that. It all comes out of pocket. And so that's why art teachers and things like that, they'll usually send home at the beginning of the year, like a little note that says, hey, if you can donate, $50 each semester so that I could go buy supplies, that would be really helpful. They can't demand it, but they can ask, because they do buy all of it.
And
themselves.
do people donate money?
Yeah, I
Okay,
do.
good. Thank God.
If my kid's teacher says like, hey, we're doing
Well, I
this
know you do.
project and
You're a
we
good
need this.
person. But I'm saying
And you know exactly what they're up against.
and you understand it. But I'm saying when you request, donate,
I
you
never requested money.
Okay, you never requested it.
I
Okay.
would tell parents if they wanted, like, the beginning of the year, some parents will ask, like, do you need anything? And I'd give them a list of like things, hey, you can, if you want, these are some things I need in the classroom.
Oh, great.
It was very rare that somebody ever actually brought something in.
As far as that goes, when we were in Vacaville, the kids school was like a charter school within a public school. It wasn't private at all, but it was like it was a program within a larger school, and they had I think it was a $35 per year that was presumably a mandatory fee for participation that went towards supplies and whatnot. And I think they had like a 30 or 40% rate of actually getting that, and that was actually a mandatory fee. But what are you going to do? You kick the kid out of school? And that was the whole deal for that program was parent volunteering in the classroom, close parent engagement. Parents were in the classroom every day. Parents were on the trips. Parents were running the projects, and it was not a high rate of getting the mandatory subscription fee for that program. So I would say the level of buy-in is low.
I have to say, I never expected parents to provide the supplies either, though.
Sure, they shouldn't have to.
They shouldn't have to. And especially, you never know what a family's like personal financial circumstances are. I have a wide range of students. I always have, there's some wealthy and some very not. So I never expected it, and I didn't ever mind buying the supplies either. I took pride in stocking my classroom and making my classroom enjoyable for my students. I think most teachers do. There's whole Instagram pages devoted to like to teacher classroom setup, but the fact that I could only deduct, it's like a slap in the face. Like, what? Does anybody else have this limit on their business deduction?
But there's a statutory limit. No, I have an LLC because I rent out, the other side of my house here, and there's no limit on what I can classify as a business expense. Are you kidding?
Yeah.
I don't even know. Like, I can deduct certain things for work. In fact, just a disgusting example: there are people in the maritime industry who go and buy a chronometer like a Rolex and deduct the whole $5,000 because it's a timekeeping device for work.
Wow, crazy. Yeah, no. So that's a real thing, and this is federally. This is a real thing. That's the cap for teachers.
That seems
So
actively hostile. I guess this is what, sorry, my mind always goes to like the macro, which I want to focus more on the micro here of
Oh, I want to go there too, though.
on the
I want to
ground
go there too.
on the
I feel
ground
like that's a good thing to
experience.
go.
But like, yeah, like someone had to propose that, write that, approve that, and to what end? Like, what hostile motherfucker is up to that sort of trickery?
Yeah, I guess I'm really curious about your thoughts on this too, Rondo. Like, the let's get into the conspiracy theory and ending of the show here, because I think we should probably wrap up reasonably soon here too. So like it seems like the American system is actively hostile to education in a lot of ways. Do you think that's true, and that it's in some way by design? Like I've certainly heard it floated that corporate America doesn't want educated, smart, supported kids because they grow up to be free thinkers who come up with their own ideas and support themselves through ways that don't necessarily involve buying stuff. So a lot of corporate donors are actively attempting to gut education, and this is kind of the predictable result. But then that's also pretty conspiracy minded, and I'm trying to give up conspiracy theories for Lent here. So I'm wondering, like, is this like an do you feel like this is by design, or just kind of a lot of decades of people being like, I was fine, the kids will be fine, I don't want to pay any more in property taxes, fuck them. Maybe a combination of the two.
I can't give any credence to that theory, but it certainly feels that way sometimes. I feel like in America, in the last 20, 30 years, there's been like an anti-intellectual movement of sorts. Like to be educated is a bad thing. Like don't be too smart. Like don't know too much. Like that's pretentious somehow. Or like, oh,
I definitely felt
it's
that when
hard
I was in school too.
It's even just what we were talking about earlier, banning certain things from being discussed in schools, or even things like not being able to talk about evolution in schools, or all kinds of things like not being able to be taught in schools or discussed. It feels sometimes like you just don't want people to really know, like be fully educated, or teaching critical thinking skills and things like that is really important. And so I don't know if that conspiracy theory holds water or not, but it certainly feels that way sometimes. Like I feel like America has just gone so far to the spectacle. So much attention put on media. Social media now is a huge thing that's distracting kids, you know. And how do you entertain even to even say that's what we're doing in school? But yeah, how do you hold the attention of kids that have been raised on media where their life is 30-second sound bits and videos? How do you hold their attention? They're so focused on that, and America is so focused on that. Spectacle and celebrity and media is so important. Sports, where the attention and the focus is taken away from intellectual pursuit. I think at some point we need to get back to that and find a balance there. In that regard, sometimes it does feel like, not only are corporations and corporate America hostile to education, but our society as a whole is hostile to real education.
Kind of on that note, it's been kind of the whole AI thing has got me thinking lately about really No Child Left Behind. I guess you weren't teaching before No Child Left Behind. I feel like that was probably a huge contributor to this whole fuckery.
Yeah.
But
yes.
a lot of
and it's
we have
even evolved since then. Yeah.
we have all this push for STEM subjects, you know, which is great. Science, technology, engineering, and math are all fantastic, right? But it seems like along with this has been this rise of denigration of the humanities. Like when we were in high school, it was still very much go to college, get a degree in applied basket weaving or whatever. It doesn't matter what you get your degree in, but you really should get a degree because it'll make you that much more marketable. And then it seems like largely post 2008 that has turned into no, you really need to get a technical degree and learn more than a trade. You like engineering, that's what's going to be what's going to secure your future. And kind of going a little further afield, but I feel like that gutting of the humanities is going to really bite us in the ass because you don't think deeply about what's happening. And now what's happening with like artificial intelligence and the rise of more and more automation of technical skills, like even creative technical skills, like creating schematics and circuit boards or whatnot, it's largely being done automatically at this point. Of course, you still need high level technicians to operate, and you probably always will. But then we're running into all these issues with ethics. And we're really short on ethicists right now because for the last 20 years, we've been pushing that everybody needs to be an engineer. And the knock-on effects from that, I think, are going to be really significant, that we've really, the first thing to get cut is art and then music and then, first dance, then art, then music. And
So those programs are being massively cut across the country, and it's I think it's really terrible because that is such an important part of education. I'm really a believer in the well-rounded education. So learning all, like what I said, being truly educated goes so far beyond just, like you said, just learn math and science and be literate. There's so much more to that, like the critical thinking skills, social emotional skills, arts and humanities. All of these things are being gutted completely. Some schools are fortunate enough to have really great programs still, but even my son's middle school, their electives were minimal. Like their options for electives were very, very minimal. Nothing like what I had when I was in school, not even close. High schools generally are a little bit better with what they have to offer. Overall, they have a little bit more, but even those programs in some places are being gutted. I think that's going to have a really big impact on us as a society. We need artists. We need we need our English majors. You know, I was an English major. We need people in the arts and humanities in the world. And,
yeah, my grandmother was an English teacher, and she was a massive proponent. And this is where I think this is a bit like not a top-down conspiracy, but a bit of a shirt sleeves and three generations issue, which is to say that we don't appreciate what brought us the wealth, in this case, like intellectual wealth, where we came from, and we're neglecting it. Is I think in my grandparents' generation, you know, they were both World War II veterans. And the people of that age knew a world where not everyone was very well educated. Like this was a struggle to get to the point that there was a basic level of literacy and education for most people. And so she was a massive proponent on especially the humanities as an integral part of a functioning society. And to people that think that this should just be that all education start to finish should just basically be job training. Like if we worship at the altar of the U.S. Constitution, you think those people didn't understand history and philosophy, or could have ever come up with those ideas if they didn't understand how the Roman Senate worked, for example? No, like that, or Hume, like all these Enlightenment ideas that went into this document are based on the classics. They're based in philosophy, and people don't understand how the foundation was built, and now we can't maintain it, and the rebar and the concrete under the building is rusting, and you're running out of people that know how to keep it up. Like all these institutions we depend on, like if you're wrongfully accused of a crime, you then enter a system, the judicial system, that there's a lot of deep philosophy that went into this idea of you should be judged by a jury of your peers, you're innocent until proven guilty, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We depend on philosophy and humanities and the understanding of the classics and where the heck we came from for basic daily functioning. Like, this stuff is nuts and bolts, right? But I think we're just blind to it. Like, we just wake up in this world and just assume this is how it always is. But like, we spent a lot of time coming out of the trees and going through brutal feudalism to get to this point. And without proper maintenance and education, it just all goes back to anarchy. And it kind of feels like that's what's like happening.
Yeah, even the consensual, more or less consensual hallucination that is money. Like, it's a philosophical concept. Money doesn't have a tangible form.
And this kind of goes back to what I brought up at the very beginning when we first started talking, is this is what public education was made for. Its sole purpose of being created, it was what our government knew. We needed an educated populace to keep this country going. That couldn't exist without educated citizenry. They knew that, and that's why they created the public education system. And to let it flounder would be a shame. And you have teachers, not only teachers, but you have janitors, nurses, psychologists, counselors, entire school staff, principals, vice principals, keeping it afloat and really working their asses off every single day to keep it going, working so hard, working long hours, much more hours than they're paid for every single day to keep it afloat. Yeah, I want to keep being a part of it. I want to keep it going. I really care about it, but sometimes it's really hard for a lot of people. They just can't keep going in it anymore. And there's not a whole lot of incentive for more and more people to join the ranks to keep it going. So I think as a whole, as a nation, we really got to get our priorities straight and think about, how are we going to keep it going? What are we going to do to support these institutions? Because everything in our country does depend on it ultimately down the line. Everything depends on it.
I feel like that's going to be a pretty good topic for kind of our wrap up here. So as parents and citizens, who are not involved in the education system on a daily basis, what can we do to support teachers in the public education system? Like, vote for your local school levy seems like a good one.
That's a big one. Yeah, go to board meetings if you can't. Even if you don't have kids, go to board meetings. Hear what's being talked about. Are they making good decisions? Do you have a voice in that? That's something that even I need to do more in my child's school. I get so caught up in my own world of teaching, like sometimes I forget that I can be more active in my own local school board. And I think that's a really big one. And ask the educators that talk to the people at the school about what's going on. What can you do to help? If there's any kind of law that's being voted on, really do your research to see if it's in support of teachers and schools. Where's that money going? What's it going to be used for? Raise teacher pay. If there's a lot of raise teacher pay, vote for it. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I think being involved in local decisions is a really big one.
Well, this has been, I thought I had some grip on how bad things were in the education system. Apparently I did not. So this has been really enlightening. Thank you for coming on and talking about something that is your expertise. This was a lot of fun. I think like Ryan Hoger said recently, like, oh, we actually like our friends and peers that we grew up with are respectable people who are experts in their subject at this point. Like, I don't feel that old, but we absolutely are.
It's just you and me that bounce around from career to career every 5 years.
Yeah, I don't know anything. I know how to drive a boat, and I get paid twice as much as teachers do.
It's
a 4-year
amazing.
degree. Yeehaw. So you're lovely, and hopefully we can speak again about something. Enjoy the rest of your trip in Saigon.
Indeed. And we do have a show Discord now, which has been the location for some heated and spicy discussion.
Oh yeah.
We'd love to get this going on in there. I'll definitely make a thread for this episode. As
some might say too spicy.
Some might say it was quite spicy.
Thank you guys so much for having me on today. This was really fun.
Thanks for coming on. It's been fantastic to have you. My eyebrows are pleased.
Get on the. How do people get on the Discord? How do people get on our socials?
We can post links. You could have them overlay this video with text and or links, and we can also put them in the show comments.
All I heard was that's your job, and I'll do that.
Yeah. That sounds like a job for somebody else.
All right.
Oh yeah, final follow-up question. Is the teachers reunion really an evil octopus that has its horrible tentacles in every aspect of society?
It's a huge topic. We just wrap this up. You're like, teachers unions
sucking the life and resources from hardworking Americans to feed the big gay.
Do you really want me to answer that?
A simple no would suffice.
No.
Oh.
All right. Well, farewell world. We're going to be coming back with more people who are knowledgeable on topics much more deeply and interesting than things that Ryan and I know. So enjoy more of the two Ryans plus other people's faces in the very near future.
Indeed. Thank you again, Rhonda. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Ryangle Podcast. Our music is by Tallac, Tallac. For more by Tallac, visit soundcloud.com/Tallac.